Welcome to another episode of Coming Up Next, the podcast, episode 151 to be exact. Thanks for streaming or for downloading the show, however you choose to consume the podcast. You can subscribe over at comingupnext.com.au, be it Stitcher, iTunes, Podbean. Podcast is also available on Spotify and YouTube, so plenty of options for you. And the show comes to you for free each and every week. If you feel like showing your support, jump on one of those platforms and leave a rating and a review. I know it seems pretty arbitrary, but it does really help push the show along and keep me bringing you guests each and every week. And speaking of guests each and every week, thank you to Corey Chen for coming on last week's episode and sharing her story as a director in the Australian TV world. If you haven't checked it out, episode 150, comingupnext.com.au. You can find it there. Romi Trower is my guest this week for episode 151. She is an actor turned writer and director with her first feature film, What If It Works, available on iTunes and across many of the other on-demand platforms. I recommend checking it out before you listen to this interview or after you listen to this interview. It's a really great film. We get into the process of getting that up. We get into Romi's career, the usual philosophical stuff. And we're going to get into it right now. Over to the interview. I watched What If It Works last night. And I mean, first of all, it's a really great film, and congratulations. Was the festival that you were at, was that for or with What If It Works?
Yes, they're still kind of trickling on, which is actually really nice because after having gone through the marketing of a low-budget film, which is quite, intensive last year, it was actually a real pleasure to sort of go back over to the States a couple of times since and just like enjoy and chill and, be back at festivals because they're really the reward, I feel like.
Yeah. Well, when you're, I guess, putting something together over such a long period of time, particularly when I'm sure it's not financially rewarding. It's...
No. Financially rewarding? Wrong game.
Yeah. I think it's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is being able to take it to places and go and enjoy the life of the film with people who are enjoying the film.
Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah. But I guess it's probably a weird moment when it's available on iTunes or on digital platforms, but still you're going to these festivals and doing Q&As and things like that with it.
Yeah. Well, I guess the thing is it's available in Australia only.
Right, yeah.
So we've got a distributor for the US and it's going to be released, I think, in June. So still milking the whole,
right.
novelty of the festival Q&A over there. Yeah.
There must be like kind of... Is there a differing experience between watching it with an audience in Australia, say in the Gold Coast, versus watching it with an audience in America?
Yeah, I've been in a number now and sort of thought to myself, like, what are the differences? And sometimes you feel like, oh, it was basically exactly the same. They laughed at the same moments. They gasped at the same moments. But over this festival, I came to the conclusion that the Americans seem to have an even greater love for the drag queens than the Australian audiences. And it's not to say the Australians don't love and appreciate them, but I don't want to give anything away, but they make a lot of noise, that audience, when it comes to some of the drag queens scenes. So, yeah, that was something I noticed this time. I thought I noticed it in Alaska. I thought I noticed it in, San Jose. I'm like, this is definitely the difference. It's the drag queens. So
yeah, that's cool. So, did you grew up in Melbourne?
I did, yes.
and I noticed that you were, similarly to me, wanting to pursuing a career as an actor before you moved into film. Was it something that you were always doing at home throughout childhood or into adolescence?
Performing or storytelling, and all of the above. Yeah, I think I was always the family storyteller. I think I was the storyteller amongst my friends too. I was always happy to, imitate and tell stories in accents and, play characters and direct my friends in what they were doing while we were playing and just generally be bossy.
Yeah.
So I was preparing for it, my whole life probably. But I was always interested in performing and writing at school as well. I sort of tried to, rewrite my own scenes in the house plays, which was probably illegal. And somehow I think I got away with it a couple of times. It would have started with writing and performing, and then, next thing you do is you end up producing, because that makes sense. And who else wants to produce, whether it's your play or your first short film. And by the time you're writing and producing and realizing that an acting career is, a hard slog and probably not my favorite element of the process once I'd enjoyed the producing and writing side of it more so. It was a natural evolution to actually want to direct, the films. So, yeah, I think it was kind of a natural progression.
Do you remember the first time that you created anything or performed or whatever it may have been that kind of spurred you down this path?
Like a lot of kids, I was dressing up in stuff, and like I said, whether it was relatives that were over, kids or adults, or, friends, I basically was always rounding everybody up, getting them in costume and making them perform something. I spent my family holidays doing the same thing. Other kids were playing sports. They were on the beach. I was like in a hall somewhere rounding up people to do like a dance routine or monologues or something. So I was definitely strange. Probably should have seen some more sun. Didn't, but that was kind of, I think it was out of my control. It was something that was happening.
Were your parents, did they encourage your quirks, or were they sort of more trying to push you down a lawyer, doctor?
Well, interesting you say that. Both my parents are doctors. Okay. So you must have felt the aura around me that said I'm the black sheep in the family that
it's just
decided to go the arts path.
We're both Jewish, that's more than likely that our
it's one or the other,
are going to be wanting to push us into being lawyers or doctors.
It's lawyer or doctor. Obviously, it's lawyer or doctor.
Yeah.
Arts, what? That's for like Saturday mornings up until you're about 16, and then you need to forget it and get a tutor.
Do that on the side.
Yeah. Exactly. So look, they probably would have thought it was a better idea to become a doctor or a lawyer. I'm pretty sure my dad said, "Why don't you do law performing arts at university?" I was like, I might just do the performing arts. Just the law bit didn't really interest me. So look, they were pretty good. I think they did encourage my interest in the arts, and they themselves are very interested in theatre and film, and it's probably their fault. Let's blame them, because they
absolutely
took me along all the time to things that I was probably too young to even appreciate. But there's a big age difference between me and my brother, and so I felt like I was often just with my parents and their friends going to theatre shows, going to films, and then trying to get somebody to explain to me what it all meant. So I think they're probably responsible for developing that curiosity.
Yeah.
So let's blame them.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Your fault, Mum and Dad.
Yeah.
Do you recall any like shows or films that kind of you felt really connected with or that influenced you later on?
I don't really think I can honestly say that there's one show or film. I think I just have general memories of going to lots of things all the time. It was like pretty regular activities. I don't have that story that I guess a lot of filmmakers have, which is I watched this one film when I was 11 years old and it was that moment that I knew. I don't have that. I know it's a good story. I should probably make it up, but I don't have that moment.
For me, it was Home Alone. Probably Home Alone 2, actually. I remember watching that in the cinema, yeah.
Yeah, that's so funny. Macaulay Culkin, yep.
Yep. He made a good career for himself.
For a while.
So when you came out of school, you did performing arts, not law, just performing arts. And was that the Monash degree?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what was the process, I guess, for you coming out of school? Did you have an agent? Did you have kind of designs on, working professionally as an actor immediately, or did you want to go and study? Were you writing as well?
I think I was a little confused as to what the best path was, and you could probably, with all due respect to Monash University, that, is very wonderful in many ways, it was, for me, probably not the best option in terms of a performing arts degree. Looking back, why didn't I did, very well in drama and at school, and I look back and I think, why didn't I try to go to the VCA? Like, what exactly was stopping me? And I think just being young and naive, and also having come from a family where everybody is either a doctor or a professor or a lawyer, and feeling this academia kind of, that there was this pressure towards that sort of stuff. I think I thought, right, the best option would be to go to like a good university like Monash, where it will be a recognised degree, and I'll do performing arts. I'll do what I want, but I'll do it at like a proper university, and somehow that's going to assure me of getting a job if it doesn't all work out. And like, what a ridiculous plan! So I think that's actually how I ended up at Monash. But the thing is, I never went with the backup plan, and I'm really not sure what sort of job I thought the performing arts was going to get me anyway. But I finished performing arts and I did get an agent, so I wanted to, start doing acting work as soon as I could. But my backup plan then veered off a little bit, and I was like, okay, I can see that this arts degree is probably not going to be like a big safety net. So I did an internship at Roadshow, the distributor, and I did a master's in communications, and my thesis was in film distribution. So that I found like an idea for an interesting backup plan, which I haven't, chased after. However, it probably did help me in this last year that's passed, where, we had a distributor to market the film, but when it's low budget and when you don't have a huge amount of, spend for that marketing, like, the best thing you can do as a director is be involved if the distributor is happy to have that sort of relationship with you. So I really wore a marketing hat pretty much all of last year. So I'd like to say there was a point to me having done that degree.
I would agree with that. And you were working, still as an actor on shows like Neighbours and Kick and Offspring, doing roles for that, but concurrently trying to decide whether or not you wanted to work behind the camera, or was that while you were doing your masters, or how did that kind of start? It actually started after I finished my masters, I think. I was writing, but it was theatre that I was writing, because that's what was easy to produce and do. And, that's what I was doing at university. You can write monologues, you can write a little play, you can get a few mates, and it doesn't cost you much. And it's relatively easy compared to, making a film. But I was probably always more interested and curious about filmmaking than I was really about becoming a theatre director. And I guess having done the acting stuff, I had the experience on the other side of the camera in terms of what is it like to be on set. What does a script look like? What is good? What do I feel is good direction? What do I feel is weird direction? That sort of stuff. So I had that kind of perspective, and I'd gone to live in New York. Well, it was meant to be a 3-week trip, and it turned into an 18-month stint full of colourful characters, which I ended up writing a play about. It was called Too Beautiful for Garbage, and I actually wanted to make a film out of this material, but at the time I was bouncing off director Richard Lowenstein, who was helping me sort of work on the script, and he suggested, actually, he said, well, look, making a film's like pretty hard. Why don't you use the material, make a play out of it first, test it out, see if audiences respond, get a little bit of traction. It'll probably be a lot easier for you to, embark on making a film. I was like, yeah, that's a really good idea. So back I went to the theatre thing as what I thought was a first step towards this making of this film called Too Beautiful for Garbage. And in the end, the play went really well. I did it as a solo show, and
it did help me in a number of ways, open a few doors. But I still haven't made a film called Too Beautiful for Garbage. I realised that set in New York and with, characters that were from anywhere but America or Australia, it was probably a little bit overly ambitious as a first feature film. I didn't want to make a short, I wanted to make a feature, so that's still sitting there. And I went and made a Melbourne story as my first feature, but of course did do a couple of shorts before that.
I was going to say, so you made a couple of shorts, which you did act in.
Yep.
What was you said you kind of had an idea of what it was like to be on set and what good or weird direction was.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, directing myself, well.
What constitutes good or weird directing?
Oh gosh, look, I think it's really different for every actor, and that's what I've probably learned as well. More so, through the shorts too. You think you've got a really great communication style, a way of getting into somebody's head, and it works really, really well with one person, and then you apply that same technique to the next person, and you realize that that's actually not working for them at all. So I'd say there's probably so many things that constitute good or bad directing, but I'd say having an awareness about the fact that people's brains work very differently and that you need to find an angle and find a way to get through to them, and you need to do it in conditions where it's stressful, you're in a rush, there's tension, people are, sensitive, you've got to find your way and you've got to find it fast and you've got to be ready to shift in order to get there. And
being able to, I guess, communicate or express yourself clearly and articulately, but in that kind of in the high sort of anxiety or stressful situations is fairly key. And
try and keep your actors feeling okay.
Yeah.
Not, I don't know, maybe some directors are just like, whatever, I'm stressed, they can be stressed, but that's not my kind of style. I like to try and make my actors feel as good as possible, no matter how difficult the situation is, whether they're freezing to death on a cliff top in -1 degree in a wind tunnel, which has happened to us, or whatever it may be. I think it's the ability to adapt to your audience, so to speak, to have a radar into different people's minds and how to get in there.
And so when you went to make these short films before you made your feature, what did you kind of have an idea of the sort of stories that you wanted to tell? Were you sort of specifically making scripts for shorts, or was that just the way that it happened?
I think I had actually written a couple of drafts of What If It Works. It was very different back then. It went through a number of phases and big changes. And so actually both the shorts that I made had something to do with either a character or a scene, not necessarily super obviously. Like most people who would see Chocolate Cake, which was the first one, probably wouldn't go, oh, right, I totally see how that's connected. They may actually need to ask me what it is that I think that is so connected between these two films. But I know in my mind what I was exploring. So, yeah, I think they both had... It started with the gem of the idea was something to do with either a character or a kind of a scene from the feature, and then this whole other beast grew around that each time.
Yeah. And how was the process for you? Was your understanding of film craft, was that but was it from working on films, or did you actually go and study as well to kind of get a understand?
I didn't do directing. I did do some screenwriting courses. But yeah, in terms of the directing stuff, it's not like I had some amazing knowledge of cameras and lenses and all that sort of thing. But I feel like that is, look, there are some people that come from a background in photography, and so that's where they're real naturals and they can bring that to the table, and that's not how I entered. But I sort of feel like if you work with a good DP and, you watch a lot of films, and you can learn about lenses and cameras and what works and what doesn't. And I guess it's about having trust in a DP as well, being able to communicate what you're trying to achieve, or your crazy ideas, and then have the DP actually talk you through what is doable and what is doable on that budget and what is doable with that camera, etc. So I think I definitely learnt as I went in that respect, but actually really enjoyed that side of it, like, you know, poring obsessively over the shot list for God knows how long. Like, I actually strangely really enjoyed that part of it. And on the feature film, I worked with Ian Jones, who has done a lot of Rolf de Heer's films, and so he's, you know, seasoned EP, and that was awesome because he had, you know, such a wealth of knowledge and experience, and we really had lots of time together in pre-production, and it was really good.
Oh, it looks great as well.
Thank you.
What were the challenges that you felt like on a day-to-day basis when you were making these shorts, in terms of trying to realise, like, you know, from script to screen for the first time?
I guess in terms of casting, like, I didn't have like government funding for the films or anything like that, so I didn't go through like a casting agent. It was more like reaching out to agents and trying not to drive them too crazy. And so I guess there's a little bit of a risk in there in terms of you're more limited in the people you see. And I guess that was one part was challenging, was like how to make sure you choose the right actors, because without the right actors you really don't have much. That's probably why I cast myself, because if I stuff it up, it's my own fault, and I can make myself rehearse like a lunatic. I can beat myself up. So no, it was probably easier, definitely, I think, having myself in one of the roles. And then, you know, I guess being on it, like with any short film or even really low budget feature, being on such a tight budget, it's, you know, you want to get good people who are experienced, who can bring something, like a good DP. Like Katie Milwright worked on my first shot, and, you know, was so thrilled that she came on board, because that's what you want. You want somebody, especially in the area that you're less trained in, you want somebody really experienced in that area. So I guess how to nab good people in the areas where you have less experience, even though you don't have much to offer except good catering, because, you know, mum always caters, which is what everybody has.
Yep.
I'm trying to think what the other challenges are. I guess I would say working really quickly, but I feel like working really quickly happens on the feature as well, you know, whether it's weather related or you're behind or whatever it is, there's always the pressure of working much faster than you think or than you plan. But I guess with shorts, you often shoot maybe on a weekend, and you've got like a bar that gives you their space for like 6 hours. And after that, you really can't come back because like customers are going to start coming in. So there's not the option to go like, okay, guys, we're a little bit over, and, you know, the line producer's going to kill me, but do you mind staying for another hour? It's like, no, customers are going to come in. That said, using real locations, which we did on What If It Works, as I was talking, it reminded me of what happened in a supermarket. We got super delayed one morning. We promised this little supermarket that we would be out by, I think it was 8:30, and there was just no way. Like, we didn't even have our full team on set for various reasons until like 8:15, and I'm pretty sure there was like, we could probably hear arguments going on between like the AD and the owners of the supermarket, while I'm just going, let's just shoot this, let's just go Luke, go, and we're just doing it anyway. Like, that sort of stuff is pretty stressful, because you feel like, you know, maybe we've offered them like a small amount of money or nothing on a short. Why on earth should they not let their customers in and let these crazy filmmakers keep going? So you definitely get yourself tangled in those sort of situations. But I feel like somehow, like, often you just get it. Like, you just get by the skin of your teeth. So, yeah. But probably grew a few grey hairs, or, you know, lost a few months off my life somewhere.
Yeah. I think when you're in that situation, it does become like not life and death, obviously, but it feels like you just need to do whatever it takes to appease the people that need to give you the yes that you can just finish off what you need to do. Yeah,
like,
except give
throw
them the
money at them, hold up the store, whatever it is. Like, you're right, it does start to feel like life, and it's like, we have to get this in, we can't leave. Like, and you think probably you might die if you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, so true. So true.
Yeah. There's a reason that they call it drama.
Yeah. We are so dramatic.
Yeah. Did you feel like there was a difference between the first short that you made and the second short that you made in terms of your process?
Well, the first short was actually a longer short, and we spent longer shooting it, so it was all up a bigger production. The second short, we shot it really in a day and a bit. So that was a little bit crazy. But I want to say in some ways it was easier because it was all set, in one room, and whereas the short before that had like too many locations, and I've set, as I said, this scene in a bar that I'm reflecting on, and I was like, oh, okay, we need like 60 people in there, and that was my one shot where you round up everyone you possibly know, like, please do this for me. And then flash forward 4 years later, your producer's telling you we can't afford any more extras on this feature film. And now it's your feature film. And it's like, I blew it. I had those guys in that day for that short. They couldn't believe they couldn't actually speak out loud. Lunch with hot dogs. It really wasn't that exciting. And they are not coming back to help me on a Tuesday. Because I need extras, to stand around in winter in the middle of a laneway in Brunswick. They're at work now because they've grown up, and I've lost my chances anyway. So I've basically got relatives, maybe like my grandfather, but that's about it.
Yeah.
So
the lesson is don't blow your wad on a short film.
Yes, but the thing is, how do you not? Because you really don't have anything to bargain with.
Yeah, I mean, if they were working, they wouldn't have been able to come the second time anyway, so... That's
exactly right. And the short, of course, was shot over a weekend because you're not going to disrupt anybody's, real job Monday to Friday. Yeah. So, yeah, maybe the lesson is shoot your scenes with extras on weekend days and you might have a chance at getting some of those suckers back in.
Yeah. You started writing What If It Works in about 2010?
Yeah, something like that. Yep. Well, maybe even 2009, I think. Just looking back, I think the short was 2010. So, yeah, probably about 2009.
Yeah, wow.
Just a casual 9 years ago. No big deal.
Yeah, no biggie. And when you started writing it, what was your kind of forecast for it at that point in time?
You mean what sort of film, or like what did I think it was going to do market-wise, or what did I hope?
Well, I guess what was your ambition in terms of realistically, how long did you think it would take to get made? What did you think it would do for you career-wise? What did you kind of hope? How did you hope it would play out?
Okay, so I should have probably had all of those thoughts, but instead I was young and silly and just really passionate about the subject matter and the characters, and I just believed in the project itself, and I desperately wanted to make it. And of course I wanted to, get an established producer on board, and I'm sure like vaguely I knew that I wanted people to see it, but I really didn't think in that way. I just thought about getting the script right. It was always just probably the next immediate step. Get this script right because I really want to make this film, and then get the right producer and take it from there. That's really probably all I thought about, which, I mean, it probably is smart to think about audience and marketing and all that stuff, on reflection from the beginning. But that's part of the learning curve that you go through, whether it be going through government agencies for funding and having them sit across the boardroom table and say, well, who is the audience for this film? Yeah. That's what we want to know. It's everyone. Well, it can't be everyone. Okay, you learn that names. Is the worst answer you can ever give anybody. Nothing is for everybody. Female, 40 plus, like whatever. No, those are good things to think about. But what happened was I did get a good producer on the film, a guy called Tristram Mile, who's produced films like Strictly Ballroom and The Black Balloon and Looking for Ali Brandy and some solid films. So, of course, that was my plan, which wasn't too silly because he had experience and, in making these wonderful films, and he knew the ropes and the steps to take, and through working with him and then having some development funding from Screen Australia and that whole long process of attaching distributors and sales agents, and you do start to realize you have to think about the marketplace and who the film is for, and is it working, and is it 3 films in one, and do you need to pare back, and do you need to the character that you thought was the protagonist, are they really the protagonist, or is it a dual protagonist story, and should it be more about who you thought was a supporting character? So all those sorts of things can take place, and you are confronted with all of those questions, and so that those thoughts happened over the course of a number of years of working on the script and working with Tris and going through all that, begging and borrowing and stealing, trying to get the film up. And yeah, now it's 2018. Flash forward, let's hope it's not 9 years till I get the next one made. That's all I can say.
How early on did Tristan come on board?
Pretty early. He was on board probably within the first year or two. So he's also been on the journey for about 8 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was it about the story that you found so compelling that you felt like, this is something that you just had to get out?
So the film is a love story, and it's about a guy called Adrian who is a tech nerd who has really severe OCD, or obsessive compulsive disorder. He kind of crashes into his new neighbour Grace, who is a street artist, and she has multiple personality disorder, also now known as dissociative identity disorder. So you may think like, well, where on earth did I come up with this kind of, obstacle-filled, ridiculous tale of romance? And it's really all comes from basically my personal experience in a couple of different ways. My own brother has a very severe case of OCD, and he's very much like Adrian in the film. And my aunt is a psychiatrist, and she specialises in patients with multiple personality disorder. So, for example, at the moment she probably has 30 or so patients with that disorder at any given time, really, and she's done this for years and years and years. So I had, I guess, this really privileged access to multiple personality disorder, or DID, through my aunt, and I was interested in it just because I found it fascinating for years, and she used to share stories, case studies, literature, all that sort of stuff. And then when I thought, you know what, this is so fascinating and intriguing and moving, I think I want to write something about this. I realised that I couldn't just read books about it. I knew the OCD because I lived with it my whole life. My brother's suffered with it since I was 5, so that's pretty much my household. But I knew I needed to know the DID in the same way. And my aunt was actually able to allow me to come into some therapy sessions with a few of her patients over a really long period of time, where I got to know them and I got to understand them and witness the process of switching from one part to another, which is something that Grace does in the film. So I guess I knew I had the privileged access to that side of it, and I found it really compelling and really moving. And I'd grown up with a very unusually severe case of OCD in my family. And I think sometimes, when you're thinking about what you want to write for your first project, it often is deeply personal. And it often is something that you happen to have a privileged access to. And as for how do these two people come together, my mum's also a therapist, just to add to it, and she shares a practice with my aunt, and they'd told me many stories of people coming together in clinics, like wild tales where you think, no, this couldn't possibly work, but like somehow it does. Like my aunt has had, at the time of my research, a patient who had multiple personality disorder, or has it. She was in a relationship with another lady who also has multiple personality disorder. So between them, there was something like, 30 or 40 parts. And then they had kids and ex-husbands and all sorts of things. And what I saw was an amazingly patient, sort of tolerant, compassionate situation where, like, perhaps because they both had so much trauma and struggle, and they could actually stop and cope with it and appreciate it and understand it. And I found that really incredible. So I guess that's the inspiration for how this story came about.
Yeah.
Which I'm not even sure was your question, but I've been rambling, I think.
I think my question was something in that space.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Lucky.
Very lucky. So you felt compelled by this access that you had, as well as your own personal experience, and you said that it kind of completely changed over time, or evolved over time, as in the story that you told. Where did it kind of begin, and how did it evolve, or what caused it to evolve?
So I think it began with a story more centered around Grace, who's the person with multiple personality disorder. So I started with, all that research through my aunt, and I thought she's going to be the protagonist. It's really going to be a film about her. but I want it to be a story about somebody else who's got their own issues that she meets. Who should that be? I'm like, looking around, OCD. Yeah, I know that one. Easy. Don't have to research the same way I did for this. And I guess as I wrote the character of Adrian, probably because he's so real and I have so much experience with this character, and he's a very, he's got a very happy nature, and he's a very caring, big-hearted kind of character despite his limitations. I think as I started to write Adrian, at various stages, whether it was producer or distributor or funding bodies, people were responding to Adrian's character. So he ended up filtering in and sort of taking a much bigger part of the story than I intended. But having been to a number of film festivals, which is sort of like therapy when you sit down with the other first-time directors, you look at like what people have made, whether it's their doc or their, narrative, and so often it's something that's so close to them, and that's their first, kind of film. So I'm like, right, this is a thing.
Yeah.
This is a thing that it filters in. It's like you need to get it off your chest in your first film. Yeah.
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 I mean, what was it like for you growing up with someone who had this OCD? And you mentioned earlier that he was, I'm assuming, older than you.
Yeah.
How do you feel as though that experience kind of shaped your creativity?
That it probably happened so subconsciously. I think it's probably hard to know consciously exactly what went on, but I mean, I guess I don't really know any different, being the younger sister, and the fact that, it started in him at a really young age. I don't really know what it would have been like to grow up in a house without it. But it probably did, because there was a bit of an age gap, and because he had limitations and it was complex and whatnot and difficult. I think I probably did spend quite a lot of time on my own in a bit of a made up world. So between that and my parents dragging me off to the theatre, and then they'd bring me back home and I'd go into a playroom and create an entire sort of story that was like an ongoing, soap opera. I think it probably did mean I spent more time in an imaginary place. That's one side of it. And I think the other side is when you grow up as a kid and you know that there's something very different or unusual about your family, and you know that there's behavior that other people are looking at like curiously and that they find odd or hard to understand, you become quite vigilant and quite aware of behavior generally. You notice the kids noticing you or your brother, and you look very hard at other people and observe what are they doing and how are they different and what are their family dynamics. And I think when you have something like that go on in your own family, you probably generally become very observant of human behavior. You're sensing, you're watching, and on top of that, I suppose I have a mum and an aunt who I'm close to, who are both psychotherapists and psychiatrists. So just for a bit of lighthearted chit chat, we could get into a little psychoanalysis here and there. So this probably explains me completely.
We've solved you.
Yeah, we've solved me. That's it.
Yeah.
This is therapy for me now.
Yeah.
In a podcast. Great. Good work, Romi.
So once you had established the script and Tristan was on board and we're 400 years into the process, how did you actually go about starting to... Well, what was the point where you decided, okay, it's time to get some money and actually make this? And then what was that process like?
That's all a big blur because it's went over so many years. But I think the first thing we did was get some development funding from Screen Australia, which we were successful with, so that was great. And then once we felt the script was ready, we probably went out to... I'm trying to remember if we went out to a distributor. We may have, because it's kind of good to test the water and see... it's all good and well that your script editor likes your film or that your producer likes your film, but I think it is good to put it in the hands of a distributor from a marketing perspective and see, well, what do they make of this? And do they have feedback? Because sometimes that's really useful and it's really different feedback to what you get just from like an editor or from a funding body. So I think we probably did do that to test the waters a little bit. And then we were trying for production funding from the funding bodies. And at the time we were in a round, I think, with about 22 projects. First time director, I think they funded 2 or 3. We weren't one of them. Incredibly disappointing, especially because, you get the development funding and you think, right, well, we're in now, and, and it's just not the case. I mean, it's limited, and it's hard. It's really hard. I think at this point, Screen Australia has actually come out and said they're not going to support emerging first-timers. It's too risky and whatnot. They actually want to support people that have more of a proven track record. And look, as a business, anyway, we won't go into that discussion. But there was no gender matters around at that time. So who knows? Maybe it could have been different. But so that was a little bit disappointing, and we had to then rethink, okay, well, that was going to be a big chunk of the budget. What are we going to do now? We were always going to go in for something called the producer's offset, whereby you get 40% of your budget back in tax the next year, which is extremely helpful, like massively so, without which we never would have been able to make the film. So I'm very grateful for that. And we knew we'd need to cobble it together with like a facilities deal from a post-production house and some private investment as well. So I think we were lucky in that we had a great deal with a post-production facility up in Sydney. That was really huge. Again, without that, we never would have been able to make the film. That was with Definition Films. And then we knew we had to cobble it together, but we needed more private than we thought. And that's really, really hard. Convincing people that investing in an independent film, the first-time director, is financially smart is basically impossible. And stupid. You shouldn't try and convince anybody that they're backing a real winner, because it's just so difficult. So I guess we had to find people who connected to the subject matter, and for one reason or another, in a more philanthropic sort of way, were happy to take a risk. It's an investment, but they had to know that, of course, it's a risk, and it's not, Mad Max Fury Road or whatever. So that all took a lot longer than we hoped, because it was hard, and we did reduce the budget down we started at one level and we cut in order to be able to get there, basically. So, but it worked in the end, and we managed to do it for that lower budget. And you write a script and you think it's a certain level, and then you think, well, it's impossible. We'll never be able to cut, $1 million out of this. And somehow you do. So it's given me a faith that, just as you think there's nothing left to cut, there's always something else to cut. So, yeah.
So you answered the question of what if it works?
Ha, ha, ha. Yeah.
Sorry, that was a really poor joke.
I've had many, you can imagine. Yeah.
I'm sure you have. So, I mean, you had amazing cast as well as a great crew. What was the process for you like of assembling this great team, obviously with some tremendous limitations?
Yeah, tricky. I think that's probably where, having gone through short films where you think, oh, nobody's going to work for me, it's probably good to have gone through that process and be like, okay, well, at least we have some money now. This isn't nothing. We're offering more than hot dogs. It's definitely vegan options, at least, So, yeah, look, it was definitely tricky. Probably one of the harder elements was that suddenly the money came together, and suddenly we realized that we needed to sort of start shooting by a particular date. And I can't recall if it was the actor's availability or a particular head of department, but for whatever reason, it suddenly came together, and we went, oh, you know what? We actually got to start now. Pre-production has to start right now, and that shoot's got to happen like June 1, and that's it. We're like, oh my God. So one of the hardest parts is that when you don't have a huge amount of lead time, like people are busy and on other projects, and just getting people like who are on projects even to have the time to read the script and then to let you know if they're available. So there was that kind of level of stress of just waiting on people, come on, have a read, let us know, and but again, it was one of those things where it somehow all fell into place, and we had a mix of some really experienced people. Like we had, Our sound department was super experienced and a bit older, and so was our DP. And then we had like production designer Ella Carey, who's young and awesome and talented. And just as I was feeling like uncertain of what we were going to do with that particular department, Ella came into the picture. I was just like, amazing, this is perfect, like so thrilled. And that was quite late in the piece, and the same with our costume designer Helen Fitzgerald. So we put together a mix of experienced and less so, and I think they were in the right spots as well. And with cast, I think the one advantage we had with this script is that there's such complex, rich characters. Both of the lead roles are so challenging that they are appealing roles for many actors. And we actually attached Luke years earlier. So I watched a lot of different actors' performances, wanting to just be open-minded to a number of people, and it just kept coming back to Luke. And it's probably pretty obvious that I'd seen him in The Black Balloon, and I was pretty blown away by that performance. And then I went and watched everything else he'd done and was like, yep, he still nailed it. Yep, he nailed it there too. Yep. And so I had a confidence that I knew he was like a sort of a method actor, somebody who would like throw himself in many months before the rehearsal started. And sure enough, he did. He was walking around Sydney with his arms in the air and avoiding doorways and lifting up toilet seats with his feet, and manifesting OCD for a very long time. So much so that when he turned up, he had his whole set of rules and regulations of what he could and couldn't touch. And I was like, he's going Daniel Day-Lewis on me.
Yeah.
But I like that level of commitment. So that was kind of easy because Luke was attached. And then with the role of Grace, or Grace and G and Spike, etc., we just put out a really wide casting call. There were times where distributors or sales agents said, you should just try and get the most sort of famous person you can for the role, because that's what's smart in terms of getting people's bums on seats. But in light of the fact that it wasn't going to be like Cate Blanchett, you have to question with Australian cinema whether somebody of a reasonable level of fame is in an independent project like mine really going to bring bums on seats or not, or if it's just a little bit of a confidence thing for the agents. And at the end of the day, we sort of investigated that path and found that if we wanted to have somebody as the most known person we could think of that was appropriate, we would have had to offer the part to them. And playing a role where you play 4 parts, with somebody with multiple personality disorder, it's such a complicated, tricky role. I couldn't imagine handing that role to somebody without seeing a test. There'd be a few actresses, of course, out there in the world that maybe you would do that with, but it seemed like just way too much of a risk. So in the end, we said, no, forget that. Let's just put out a casting call and just find somebody who's super talented, and it doesn't matter. That's what we need. We need to know that she can do this and she can nail it 150%. And Anna Sampson has done a lot of theatre. She's been at the MTC and now at Malthouse, and she's brilliant in the theatre. So that was more of her background, but that also, I guess, gave her a kind of a fitness in terms of, theatre actors know how to play 4 characters in a night. And poor thing, she was in a play for the first few weeks of our shoot. She was actually running from a play where she, I think, had 4 or 5 roles to our set where she had 4 parts. And somehow she just did it all and worked like a champion. And we saw lots of tests, but I had a great gut feeling about Anna from the first test. But then in my own OCD sort of way, I felt compelled to watch all the tests and do the callbacks and make sure I gave lots of people a chance and, didn't sort of overlook anybody. But it wasn't difficult in that my gut was always really solid about her. So.
And when you went to actually start shooting, what was first day on set like?
Do you know what's funny? You sort of think, I'll make my first feature film, first day on set's going to be absolutely terrifying and, oh God, no, how's it going to work? And pre-production is actually so stressful, like getting things together, getting everything in place, all those moving pieces, often which just as you think they're there, something gives way and you back to square one with something. And it goes on for, it feels like a long time, just trying to get everything in gear, get ready. It's like before a race, or like there comes a point where you don't want the anticipation anymore. You just want to do the job, enough preparation. You just want to be there. And I remember thinking, oh my God, day one must be so scary. And by the time we're at the end of our I was just like, yep, just get me there. Like, I'm done with pre-production. Goodbye. I want to move into this next chapter. So it was actually weirdly a relief to start, just to actually start. Stop talking and let's just start. And day one, actually, if I recall, I think we finished ahead of time. I was like, this is so good, but it's probably some sort of twisted bad omen. It's like going to happen just this day and never again. And we certainly had some crazy shit go on. I had a back episode. I slipped a disc into my back and was rushed to emergency surgery on day 8 of the shoot. So
as you do,
probably was a bad omen that things weren't going to go to schedule. As you do, spent a few days in intensive care. Was told I had to go home and recover for 3 months. That was not an option. Obviously, I'd shot 8 days. I had locations, hot sets, actors who had other jobs to go to. So I had to convince the surgeon to let me go back to work after 8 days, which was kind of nuts. But
just took a lot of endone.
Well, the thing was, I was on a lot of morphine at the time making these decisions. Then it was like, yeah, it'll be all right, and
I can do anything.
I feel fine. Doesn't matter. I can't stand up. And then of course I was like, well, no, you can't go to set on morphine. You make a different type of film completely. It's colourful enough, the movie. So I ripped off the morphine patch, and that was not so funny anymore. But that's a whole other story. But hey, it worked out in the end.
Yep.
But yes, needless to say, it didn't all go as smoothly as that first day where we finished ahead of time. We finished 8 days later than anticipated based on my surgical adventures.
Yeah.
So,
well, all things considered, that's probably not horrible.
No, could have been worse. Could have been worse. Yeah.
How's your back now?
Let's not talk about it.
All right.
Yeah.
So why comedy? Why romantic comedy? Is that something that you've always been interested in? Have you always had a kind of comic or comedic sensibility? Is it like your dad just didn't stop making horrible jokes while you were growing up? And
how did you know that?
It's the Jewish thing.
Yeah. Sorry, Dad.
Same dad.
But
sorry,
yeah,
Dad.
Nah, terrible jokes.
Yeah.
So I had to find a way to be funnier. I think for a story, I think I've always enjoyed that comedy drama zone. My play was in that zone. My short films were in that zone. Again, I don't know if it was a conscious decision or that's just how I see stories and how I see life. I think maybe growing up in a household that was a little bit, complex and crazy, you can be all gloom and doom about things, or you can kind of try and use your sense of humor to help you get through. And I think probably even my brother has a great sort of kind of self-awareness and sense of humor. And I think he uses that, and I think we would use that. So I think there were times where stuff was going down and, we'd be like ripping our hair out or like feeling pretty crap, and then next minute you sort of like you do a double take on the scenario and you go, wow, this is pretty absurd, what's happening here? And next thing you know, you're in fits of laughter. And I think that those things really do live side by side. There are so many moments where, depending on who's there, the balance of the day, you could cry or you could laugh or you could possibly do both within a short space of time. And I think that's really, really true, and I like that space. So I think with a story like this, it was a very natural place for the story to be at. You could definitely tell a story about people with mental health struggles that is very dark and very depressing and very bleak. That's not generally my view and my sort of style. And I felt like if I told a story about multiple personality disorder and I just, delved into the fact that, it stems from abuse and it's, and that's all we focused really on, like more like a documentary on how it happens, why, etc. I knew it might have been interesting, but I also knew it probably wasn't going to be something people would want to connect to or recommend to their friends, because it would be so much that they might have, adverse reaction to it. So I think when you throw a little bit of comedy in, it's a lot easier to tell certain truths.
Have you had any poor responses to the film, or has it been mostly very positive?
I actually haven't. I've had a lot of, I mean, there might be people who've watched it and hated it. I'm sure there are. But I've been to quite a number of festivals now in different countries and different cities. And generally speaking, a lot of people that will stand up in a Q&A or wait till after the Q&A to want to come and talk to me are actually people who either suffer with something themselves or have a sibling or a parent or a partner, either with OCD or with, schizophrenia or an array of issues. And I've often ended up having these really really quite intimate discussions with strangers. This happens like a lot. And I think a lot, I've had enough feedback now to know that it has worked for those people. And I think it's given some people hope, or just or even just shown them people that are similar to the people they love on screen, which is a good thing, I think. So I've had letters from people with multiple personality disorder telling me how they felt and why they found it accurate and what it means to them that somebody like that is shown on a screen. And one person wrote to me and said, like, I hope with a film like that it might make it a bit easier for me to tell somebody that I have multiple personality disorder, because it's presented in a way where you love these characters, you understand them, you love them, and you root for them, and they're accessible. But yeah, so it's hard to sort of not sound like I'm blowing my own trumpet, but I've been amazing. Very moved. I've been very touched by the reactions of, whether it was a mum of a boy who has schizophrenia, and this was in America. She waited to the end. She didn't want to speak in public. She came up to me afterwards and she just said, like, thank you so much, like, for presenting these characters as lovable, for showing the humanity, and because it's it's not all dark and bleak and horrible, and I love my son and you love your brother, and so yeah, that's one of the probably the nicest element, is the connection you have with other people who have suffered and struggled and wrestled with these sorts of issues in their kind of sphere. That's been more important than a review, or just so yeah.
I could imagine that would be very gratifying.
Yeah, as you said, you know that you're not going to make squillions of dollars, so like what is the reward at the end? And if you know that you've managed to connect with people, it means so much. Like, it just means so much. So I'm not going to retire on those feelings, unfortunately.
Retire on a big pile of feelings.
Yeah, just going to retire on the feelings.
Yeah. Well, hopefully it won't take another 9 years to make the next one, and it may be a little bit more straightforward. Hopefully.
I'm going to touch a little wood now.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's wood or not. Looks like it has some sort of wax coat on it.
It'll get through.
All right. Messages got through. Thank you so much for coming and chatting with me. Aside from iTunes, which is where I watched the film, where else can anyone who's listening find it if they'd like to watch it in Australia? In Australia. So it's Google Play, iTunes. There's something called Ozflix, which is a channel for Australian films. And it's available on DVD for those people who still have a DVD player. And there are people who still like to watch on DVD. There's something about a tactile experience that's quite nice. Yeah, you get to hold it, open it. It's got all this lovely artwork. And so it is available at, your good old JB Hi-Fi and good DVD and retailers. And with our distributor label is selling it direct through their company too. So if you hit up our website, which is www.whatifitworksmovie.com, you can access a direct purchase that way too, if you are so inclined. Thank you very much. And I finish all of my conversations with the same question. Question is, what makes you silly? What makes me silly? Like, why am I silly? I need to qualify constantly, don't I? Why am I silly? Or it's grammatically ambiguous. Is this like
what's the show? Is this like James Corden's guy, like the musician who asks like questions that are... Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know who James Corden is, but I can't say I've watched the show.
This musician who asks questions like they're less straightforward than this one. I should never go on the James Corden show. Put it that way, because like I don't think the idea is to ask a question back. I think it's the number one rule as to what not to do.
I have no rules.
I'm really silly in so many ways. Why I'm silly, I've probably explained that in this whole podcast, but I'm like totally silly because being silly is the best. It's fun. You need to be silly.
Yeah.
Can't be too serious.
What are some of your go-to silly things?
Oh, probably stupid dancing. Like I love like hearing a funny track, like a 90s track or an 80s track or just a really hilarious song, and getting out on an actual dance floor and just pulling some really ridiculous moves, but like for a while.
Yeah.
And getting into it, and people around you at first like nah, but then like they get on board, and then like you've got a crew of people doing stupid moves. That's probably my favorite type of silliness.
Harks back to the 12-year-old disco butt mitzvahs.
Exactly.
With the line dancing.
Exactly.
Yeah, I remember that as well. Thanks so much, Romi.
Thank you.